Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pope Metallicus, and welcome back to Rock and Roll Religion, where we've got a newer artist for you today. Relatively unknown band, kind of flew under the radar. I found out him a few years ago. I've been following them, and they just released new material. And we are going to try to go through their early history a little bit briefly, and then we are going to go into their discography because that's going to be cool. And this new album is absolutely kick ass. I think you guys are really going to like it. We are talking about Air Raid coming out of Gothenburg, Sweden. It looks like they were formed about 2009 by Andreas Johansson. And there have been some lineup changes over the years. They picked up Magnus Mild in 2015 as another guitar player. They've swapped out their singer, I think, once or twice in their first couple of records. And now they are going with their current singer. Let's see if I can pronounce this correctly. Fredrik Werner, probably. They're Swedish, so the pronunciation's a little odd. And they are, I would say, consistently improving. Like that's not to say they were bad when they started. Their early output is still worth listening to, and we'll get into that in a second. But I believe their newer output is really where it's at. And I think this is one of those bands that instead of being, a lightning strike, just slowly built up to being an exceptional artist. And we'll go through their early stuff before we really get into the meat of it. The first album they came out with a demo in 2011, then an EP in 2012, and then this in 2012 as well, Night of the Axe, which, it's a solid first release. Their older singer I don't like as much, but he's still a very solid singer, more akin to like an Udo Dirkschneider from Accept rather than, a Rob Halford or a Bruce Dickinson, which, I can see the benefits to both of them. I enjoy both singers, but I do enjoy Frederick a little better than their previous singer. That being said, it's a solid release. I would check it out if you can. I know a lot of these albums are kind of hard to find in the US, being a Swedish band that's not a very big draw. So maybe not the easiest thing to find, but well worth your time. I know all the albums are on YouTube, so I would definitely check them out. And then their second one in 2014, Point of Impact. Again, an improvement in their sound overall. Really a iterative improvement on the original. I believe they still have their original singer here because this is 2014. So, it's the same singing style, which I don't like as much, but again, really solid and a really heavier album than what came next. I don't know if they changed production companies or whether they just wanted to go with a different sound for this next one, but was really a more full sound to these first two than on the next, which I appreciate. And they changed up their guitarist and singer in 2015, or one of their guitarists and their singer in 2015. And then in 2017, we got this one, which is the first album I ever heard by them, Across the Line, which they are exactly as 80s as they sound. This is a very good example of what we call the new wave of traditional heavy metal, where they're playing a much older sound, a much more speed and trad heavy, and in some cases even power metal sound than we've heard in the modern day, and at least in the US. And I really dig this whole movement. I'm a huge 80s heavy metal fan, I'm sure you can tell. And these guys have absolutely killed it. This album from 2017, the best way I have to describe it is if you love the Mega Man soundtracks, this is your fucking record. Like a lot of their guitar riffs and stuff like that sound like they came straight out of an 80s heavy metal inspired video game like Mega Man or maybe the original Sonic the Hedgehog and stuff like that. And I dig it. Some really, really good tracks on here, including the opener with Hold the Flame and all. Yeah, Soul Assassin. I know, right? I never talk about 80s metal ever. No. That's not like, 90% of my content. But this stuff, like the sound is a little thin. It's almost like And Justice for All, where the bass line is kind of really down in the mix. And I don't like that as much as their earlier sound, but their singer I like a lot better because he's much more of a Bruce Dickinson or Jeff Tate type singer where he goes really high and can also sing in the middle and low ranges. So really versatile singer. The guitarists are absolute monsters, as you expect from every Swedish band coming out. They really did, I think, improve their sound overall, but I don't think it was fully there yet until this latest release. I would still give it a solid 7, and absolutely you should go try to find it and listen to it because I thoroughly enjoy this record. And none of them are very long records either. I think this one's 40 minutes. So not a huge time investment and well worth it, in my opinion. Lord Thoth is here. Praise be Lord Thoth. Just in time to get us into the main event. They did come out with an EP in between these two called Demon's Eye, which is phenomenal, and you should absolutely listen to it. It's 2 songs, Demon's Eye and Midnight Burner, both fantastic tracks, both bangers in their own right, and 2 different kind of styles. Demon's Eye is a little slower, whereas Midnight Burner is pretty much just straight 80s speed metal, and I love it. But getting into it, we have this beast that came out about a month ago now by the name of Fatal Encounter. And yes, the album art's fucking glorious. I love it. It is the most overdone 80s thing possible, and I couldn't be happier with it. It's very early Photoshop in terms of like the sheen on everything, but it's great, especially for a band this size. Like the production value on this record really, really increased. It's on a whole nother level than they used to. Their bottom end really filled out. It's a lot more thunderous and epic than it used to be. And, getting right into the track listing, the opening song on this track was still the single on this record, and one they released early, by the name of Thunderblood, which, god damn, what a track. Very, very familiar to any fan of 80s heavy metal. Especially if you're into the Swedish, like, neoclassical style, just fist pumping, kind of neoclassical, hard edge sound that made the 80s famous across the world. And just a brilliant, hang on one second. Just bringing the track listing up here so I can, there we go. Just follow along with me. But no, they, after Thunderblood, you have Lionheart. Really cool track. Listening to some of the lyrics, it sounds like it's written about Richard III of England during the Crusades, which, that's no bad thing. He was one of the badasses of history, which is why he's known, throughout the times as Richard the Lionheart, which, cool. Again, you'll really see a lot of the Yngwie Malmsteen and people like that influence here. In fact, this whole album really does sound like an early Yngwie album, and that is no bad thing. The vocal performance is outstanding. Their guitarists are on point, and for the first time at this band, you really hear the bottom end with the bass and drums. This mix I really prefer to their earlier stuff. It's really good. And going into, the third one, In Solitude, this one's really interesting to me. It sounds really poppy and really catchy, and I absolutely adore it. It's one of those times where a really poppy, polished song comes across as heavy as fuck, and I really dig it. Like, actually knocked it out of the park on this one. Really solid tunes. The solo's epic. The lyricism is just great, and even the main riffs is just really infectious and really catchy because it doesn't sound that complicated, and it just hits hard. So again, really solid effort on that one, and this whole album is, I think, 37 minutes total. So it's not a huge time. And at the end of this, I think I may play some clips from the album because I know you guys are going to want to hear some of that. And I don't have a guest today. So that's going to be, I think, where we're going to get a little bit of the I feel for this record that isn't just me running my mouth. But yeah, track 4 is See the Light. Another really solid track. Like this album, one thing I've noticed with the NWOTHM bands is they tend to go back to this older style of composing an album where the tracks just flow very well together. And I'm glad to see that make a return because that is, in my mind, the mark of a superior product when it's not just, you have a song here or there that's packaged for public consumption, and the rest of it's just filler because you had to make a track. That's what EPs are for. And this is a whole work that fits really well together and flows very well. This one is kind of, I wouldn't say filler, but it's there to bridge a gap in the piece, and I really appreciate it for that. And then you go into Sinfonia, which is basically a straight up Baroque piece that is an instrumental leading into track 6, which is Edge of a Dream. Again, kind of a more power metal feel to it with the lyricism, and very reminiscent of Yngwie Malmsteen at his finest, something like Odyssey or something like that, which, again, no bad thing. That is an excellent, in fact, let me see if I can pull up a clip of that, and okay, let's look this up. We're going to share, if I can actually make this function. There we go. And just check this out for a second. Like that is straight up Baroque mastery, and you can even hear, I believe it's a synth in the background, unless they got an actual harpsichord player to play that in the background. It just really brings home where the musical roots of this style came from, which is straight up Baroque Europe. Things like Mozart and Beethoven and things like that. It's really, really, kind of highbrow, which is odd to say for a heavy metal band, but solid Soul Assassin, you're not wrong. And that's what I was talking about with that kind of like 80s video game vibe to some of their stuff. And there's a reason for that. A lot of 80s video games and 80s and early 90s, like Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis era, took their musical cues from heavy metal and just brought it into that format, and obviously into 8 or 16-bit sound, because processors back then weren't the greatest thing ever, and didn't really have the ability to produce that kind of sound quality that we would want. But again, that's just a instrumental track that leads as an intro into another one, and that and Edge of a Dream lead into. You're absolutely right. The classic composers would absolutely be metalheads, and it's to the extent where a lot of people I know that are classical, either musicians or like to really know that period, absolutely adore the genre because they see a lot of musical comparison, which is interesting that, you had something that was written for a full orchestra or something like that that's being played on 4 or 5 instruments. So it's interesting to see that, shrink down into, the modern heavy metal band. And it's interesting considering that rock and roll and heavy metal were kind of a rebellion against traditional music and going away from those roots. And then they brought it back in somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s as part of this NWO BHM style, which is now being revived in the 2020s as NWO THM. Well, 2010s really is when it starts. With bands like Wolf, Ambush, these guys. There's a whole list of them, and I absolutely adore all of them. Obviously, there's ones that are kind of more generic, but a lot of it's really fucking good. Um, kind of going back to that golden age of the mid 80s with heavy and speed metal that really just took the world by storm. And the reason a lot of 80s heavy metal or 80s video games have kind of a heavy metal feel to them is metal was huge in the 80s in Japan. Um, there's so many bands that have released live albums from the Budokan in Japan, and there's a ton of Japanese bands, including one we'll see them these guys covering later in Japanese, which is interesting, on this record at the end, and really solid. And that all has led into probably my favorite track on the album, Let the Kingdom Burn. This album or this track is absolutely monstrous. I'll see if I can look up a little bit of it. I want to give you guys some clips here. Bear with me. There it is. Just listen to the thunder in the tone here. Yeah, that's unfortunately I have to be careful with what I share on here because I will get claimed for that probably. But oh, it's brilliant in terms of their just kind of simplicity, but also at the same time just creating this kick-ass riff that just has this bottom end that's just absolutely beastly. And that's what I mean with the production quality of this record. This is something you wouldn't hear on the previous albums that really stands out to me in this band's discography and makes Fatal Encounter probably the best thing they've done yet. And if they keep improving at this pace, they are on track to be an absolute monster of a band. Criminally underrated, in my opinion. Like, these guys, I don't think have much of a following, at least not outside of Sweden, which I think is a shame because these guys really know their shit and they're really talented. And they're what I would call a metalheads band, where they are fans themselves. They play this shit because it's what they love. And I don't think they're out to get famous because, let's face it, nobody plays heavy metal for the money. But no, going into the back half of some of these records, the last track on this album is one I really want to talk and touch on. It's a cover song of the band Makeup doing a new version of Pegasus Fantasy, which is pretty kick-ass. Again, kind of 80s video game vibe or early anime intro for you weebs out there, kind of vibe. And I really dig it. And they actually sing it in Japanese, which is interesting that these guys can speak not only English and obviously Swedish because that's where they're from, but Japanese, or at least pronounce Japanese well enough to do a track in it as well. So really well done. And I actually like it better than the original. I went back and looked up the original track on YouTube after, to compare the two. And, I think these guys did a better job of it. So it's always nice to see a cover that you like better than the original, because that really just means they took it to another level. And again, I don't. Yeah, Soul Assassin, you're right. I was about to say I don't know how some of these bands are not way more popular than they are, because I listen to these guys and like Ambush and all these people all the time, and I'll tell people about it and they're like, "Who?" It's like, no, these guys are absolutely kick ass and not afraid to play something a little different. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate in any band is the willingness to not do what everyone else is doing and just kind of play your style. That stands a lot of these bands apart from the, oh good, another, hair metal revival band or whatever. And that, I think, is the key to, being a really solid band overall, is not following the trend. And if it does end up fitting into a genre that's up and coming right then, that's cool. But I don't see that as, like, being part of that genre shouldn't be the goal. It should be a result of your output and where you wanted that album to end up. And overall, this one's going to be a smaller episode, really tiny band that you guys should absolutely go and look up their material. It's excellent. Um, it's all on YouTube, I believe. And again, like I said, most of these albums are 35, 40 minutes. So not a huge time investment. Really great progression as far as bands go, in that the early stuff is, I don't want to say it's bad, because it's not. It's, I would say, above average, and they've moved from there to excellent. And this album I would give a solid 8.5, and would recommend that you not only, go and listen to it, but go out and buy it if you can. A lot of this stuff, they don't, I mean, physical media is dying as kind of a method of release. And unfortunately, the bands don't make anything off of streaming platforms. Like, they get paid almost nothing every time their song gets played. So I would heavily recommend that you go get a physical copy of these. I plan on it. And, they are expensive. And some of these smaller print bands, a CD will run you 25, $30. But they are on Amazon, I believe. I looked up a couple of their albums there, and it really is worth your money, I believe. And at least worth a spin and see what you think. Because I know half of you guys, your playlist is full of shit I've recommended. And it's really important that we showcase and shine a spotlight on bands like this so they can get the attention they deserve. Because if nobody's talking about them, nobody's listening to them. And with that, I think we're going to close this one out. Thank you guys for showing up in chat. To those of you who are watching later, thank you for stopping by and checking out the channel. I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and throw a like on this video. That's how we get out there and get more metalheads like you into this kind of shit. And that's how we get these bands up to the top of the pile where they belong. With that all being said, take care, stay safe. I love you all, and I'll catch you next time.